the sublimity of the view. The numerous rocky points, peering threateningly forth at low tide, among which the steersman must pick his way with great care, were all hidden from our sight. We glided safely over them, and in about 20 minutes had left the first fall behind us. The 2 succeeding falls are less considerable. On the Austro-Wallachian side, a road extends over a distance of 14 to 16 miles, frequently strengthened with masonry, and at some points hewn out of the solid rock. In the midst of this road, on a high wall of rock, we see the celebrated Veteran Cave, one of the most impregnable points on the banks of the Danube. It is surrounded by redoubts, and is admirably calculated to command the passage of the river. This cave is said to be sufficiently spacious to contain 500 men. So far back as the time of the Romans it was already used as a point of defence for the Danube. Some 5 miles below it we noticed the Trajan's tablet, hewn out of a protruding rock. On the Turco-Serbian side the masses of rock jut out so far into the stream that there is no room left for a footway. Here the famous Trajan's Road once existed. No traces of this work remain, save that the traveller notices, for 15 or 20 miles, holes cut here and there in the rock. In these holes strong trunks of trees were fastened. These supported the planks of which the road is said to have been formed. At 11 in the forenoon we reached Alt Orsova, the last Austrian town on the military frontier of Banata or Wallachia. We were obliged to remain here for half a day. The town has rather a pretty effect, being composed mostly of new houses. The house belonging to the steamboat company is particularly remarkable. It is not, however, devoted to the accommodation of travellers, as at Drinkova. Here, as at Pressburg and Pest, each passenger is required to pay for his night's expenses, an arrangement which I could not help finding somewhat strange, inasmuch as every passenger is made to pay twice, namely, for his place on the steamer and for his room in the inn. It was Sunday when we arrived, and I saw many people proceeding to church. The peasants are dressed tolerably neatly and well. Both men and women wear long garments of blue cloth. The women have on their heads large handkerchiefs of white linen, which hang down their backs, and on their feet stout boots. The men wear round felt hats, and sandals made of the bark of trees. March 29th. After having completely refreshed ourselves at the good inn called the Golden Stag, we this morning embarked on a new craft, the Saturnus, which is only covered in overhead, and is open on all sides. So soon as a traveller has stepped upon this vessel he is looked upon as unclean, and may not go on shore without keeping quarantine. An officer accompanied us as far as Galatz. Immediately below Alt Orsova we entirely quit the Austrian territory. We are now brought nearer every moment to the most dangerous part of the river, the Iron Gate, called by the Turks Demir Kaju. Half an hour before we reached the spot, the rushing sound of the water announced the perilous proximity. Numerous reefs of rocks here traverse the stream, and the current runs eddying among them. We passed this dangerous place in about 15 minutes. Here, at the Iron Gate, the high tide befriended us, as it did at the former falls. I found these falls, and indeed almost everything we passed, far below the anticipations I had formed from reading descriptions, frequently of great poetic beauty. I wish to represent everything as I found it, as it appeared before my eyes, without adornment indeed, but truly. After passing the Iron Gate we come to a village, in the neighbourhood of which some fragments of the Trajan's bridge can be discerned at low water. The country now becomes flatter, particularly on the left bank, where extend the immense plains of Wallachia, and the eye finds no object on which it can rest. On the right hand rise terrace-like rows of hills and mountains, and the background is bounded by the sharply defined lines of the Balkan range, rendered celebrated by the passage of the Russians in 1829. The villages, scattered thinly along the banks, become more and more miserable. They rather resemble stables for cattle than human dwellings. The beasts remain in the open fields, though the climate does not appear to be much milder than with us in Austria. For today, nearly at the beginning of April, the thermometer stood 1 degree below zero, and yesterday we had only 5 degrees of warmth, reckoning by Reamer. The expeditious and easy manner in which cattle are here declared to be free from the plague also struck me as remarkable. When the creatures are brought from an infected place to one pronounced healthy, the ship is brought to some 40 or 50 paces from the shore, and each animal is thrown into the water and driven towards the bank, where people are waiting to receive it. After this simple operation the beasts are declared free from infectious matter. Cattle rearing seems to be here carried on to a considerable extent. Everywhere I noticed large herds of horned beasts, and many buffaloes. Numerous flocks of goats and sheep also appear. On the Saturnus we travelled at the most for 2 hours, after which we embarked, opposite the fortress of Fetislav, on board the steamer Zrierny. At 5 o'clock in the evening we passed the fortress of Vidin, opposite which we stopped, in the neighbourhood of the town of Calafat. It was intended merely to land goods here, and then to proceed immediately on our voyage, but the agent was nowhere to be found, and so we poor travellers were made the victims of this carelessness, and compelled to remain here at anchor all night. March 30th. As the agent had not yet made his appearance, the captain had no choice but to leave the steward behind to watch over the goods. At 6:30 in the morning the engines were at length set in motion, and, after a very agreeable passage of 6 hours, we reached Nicopolis. All the Turkish fortresses on the Danube are situated on the right bank, mostly amid beautiful scenery. The larger towns and villages are surrounded by gardens and trees, which give them a very pleasant appearance. The interior of these towns, however, is said not to be quite so inviting as one would suppose from a distant view, for it is asserted that dirty, narrow streets, dilapidated houses, etc., offend the stranger's sight at every step. We did not land at any of these fortresses or towns. For us the right bank of the river was a forbidden paradise, so we only saw what was beautiful, and escaped being disenchanted. Rather late in the evening we cast anchor opposite a village of no note. End of Section 2.